The royal palace is a place built on the foundation of absolute, calculated silence. It is a world where emotions are never meant to be shown, where every single word uttered by a royal is scrutinized for hidden meanings, and where most significant battles are fought behind closed doors, away from the prying eyes of the public. But recently, something shifted. The carefully maintained facade of the British monarchy, the one that has survived centuries of turmoil, was suddenly shaken by a ripple that became a tidal wave. Prince William, the future king, finally broke the silence. He didn't just speak. He issued a statement that effectively drew a line in the sand regarding his mother, the late Princess Diana. And while the world saw a simple royal update, inside the palace walls, the reaction was nothing short of seismic. Rumors have been swirling that Queen Camilla was found visibly distraught, weeping in the privacy of her chambers, shortly after William's statement went public. But we need to look beyond the basic headlines. Why now? Why would a measured, cautious, and incredibly disciplined Prince William choose this moment to speak out? This was an impulsive, emotional outburst. William is not a man who acts on a whim. He is a person who calculates, who weighs the impact of every sentence, and who understands that in his position, words are weapons. This was a deliberate, strategic move, and it all traces back to a single, innocuous-looking document that was never intended to reach his desk. Imagine a cold, sterile room where institutional advisors gather to discuss the future of the monarchy. They deal with reputation management and legacy communications. It sounds boring, bureaucratic, and harmless. But in the context of the British royal family, these terms carry weight. The document in question proposed a quiet, long-term plan to reposition Diana's public legacy. The language used was chillingly corporate. Historical friction, diminished visibility, and reallocation of public attention. To these advisors, Diana was not a beloved icon. She was a variable that needed to be managed, a problem that needed a solution. When William read these words, when he saw his mother being treated as a PR issue to be solved, something inside him clicked. The document didn't stop there. It contained a summary of a private consultation between senior figures and a top-tier legal team. The question they were exploring was deeply unsettling. At what point does the sustained public presence of a deceased figure begin to compromise the institutional standing of current members? It was essentially a roadmap for erasing someone from history. When William realized who had authorized this review, who had essentially signed off on the effort to make his mother a footnote, he didn't lash out. He didn't storm the hallways. He did what he always does when he is deeply betrayed. He went deathly silent. That silence was, for those who knew him, the ultimate warning sign. For weeks, the atmosphere in the palace had become heavy, almost suffocating. Staff members noticed a shift. The king was uncharacteristically withdrawn, and Camilla had reportedly begun to clear her schedule, sensing the storm that was brewing. When William finally made his move, he did so with absolute precision. He didn't mention names, but the message was clear to everyone involved. He declared that Diana's legacy belonged to history, to her children and to the people, and that it was not, under any circumstances, to be managed by the institution that had failed to protect her during her life. It was a cold, hard assertion of authority, and it was that specific realization, the fact that she had been caught, exposed, and publicly overruled by her own stepson, that brought the queen to her breaking point. The tears weren't just about a statement. They were about the loss of control. After 2 decades of painstakingly building a role for herself, surviving the harshest scrutiny in the world, and enduring the constant, unfair comparisons to Diana, Camilla had finally realized the truth that the public has long suspected. She could survive the press. She could survive the critics. But she would never, ever be able to fill the space that Diana occupied in the heart of the future king. And in that moment, the entire power dynamic of the royal household changed forever. If William's statement was a spark, the public's reaction was a wildfire that followed. It didn't happen in a vacuum. For years, there's been a quiet, growing tension inside the palace, a sense that the institution was trying to curate the royal narrative a little too carefully. When the statement finally broke, the world didn't just listen. They responded with an intensity that caught the palace off guard. Within hours, Diana's name was trending globally, from London to Sydney, Toronto to New York. The grief of a generation that grew up with her, and a new generation discovering her legacy, collided in a massive surge of support for William. It became clear that Diana wasn't just a memory. She was a force that the institution had never truly managed to control, no matter how hard they tried. And then there was the king. King Charles III found himself in the most uncomfortable position imaginable, caught between his duty as the monarch, his role as a husband, and his instinct as a father. Those who know Charles will describe him as a man who goes incredibly still when he is processing deep trauma or difficult information. He doesn't pace, he doesn't fidget. He simply stands, absorbing the weight of the situation. After reading the internal legal analysis regarding William's public defense of Diana, Charles reportedly asked 2 questions. Questions that remain a closely guarded secret, but the very fact that he asked them at all sent a chill through the royal household. Charles has spent his entire reign trying to modernize the monarchy without letting it fall apart. He has always tried to be the bridge between tradition and the future. But this situation wasn't about modernization. It was about memory, and memory is the one thing that protocol cannot govern. The optics were brutal for the institution. Everywhere you looked, the narrative was clear. The future king was standing firmly on the side of his mother's memory, while the current queen was being painted into a corner. Camilla, to her credit, had spent 20 years trying to prove her loyalty and her right to be there. She had endured boos. She had navigated the complex minefields of public opinion. And she had largely succeeded in being accepted. But in one single afternoon, that progress felt like it was crumbling. What made the situation so painful was a contrast. William's office began sending out personal, handwritten letters to Diana's charitable partners. Not mass-produced templates, but genuine, heartfelt acknowledgments of the work his mother started. When one of these organizations framed a letter in their boardroom, it sent a message to the world. William was not just talking. He was doing. He was physically and symbolically reclaiming the parts of the institution that rightfully belonged to his mother's legacy. And as this narrative gained momentum, Camilla's position began to look and feel increasingly precarious. The palace machinery, ever the bureaucrat, tried to manage it. There were secret, late-night meetings, legal reviews of the precedent, and frantic discussions about how a future king could publicly contradict a position supported by the monarch's own household. But there was no containing this. You can manage a document, you can edit a report, but you cannot manage the public's heart once they have decided who they are standing with. The younger generation, in particular, was vocal. To them, the issue was simple. A son was defending his mother. That is a human truth that transcends royal protocol. Inside the royal residences, the tension was palpable. It wasn't a loud, shouting match type of conflict. It was quieter, more chilling. It was a lack of conversation during dinner. It was the way the staff moved around the rooms, avoiding eye contact. It was a reality that, for the first time in his life, the king couldn't simply make a decision that pleased everyone. He couldn't protect his wife without alienating his son, and he couldn't support his son without publicly undermining his wife. It is a no-win scenario, and for a man who has spent his life trying to bring order to a chaotic world, the irony was not lost on him. What was truly fascinating to watch was the psychological toll on Camilla. She is a woman who has learned to be resilient. She knows how to take a hit. But this wasn't just a hit from the press. It was a reality check from the future of the monarchy itself. The realization that she would always be viewed through the lens of Diana wasn't new. But the fact that it was being brought back into the light by her own stepson, the man who will lead the institution she currently serves, made the burden significantly heavier. She realized then that there are lines in the royal family that, once drawn, cannot be crossed back over. The era of the quiet repositioning was over. The era of Diana's legacy being an active, protected, and non-negotiable part of the future of the monarchy had begun. Now, let's talk about the meeting that nobody saw. The private encounter that took place behind closed doors after the dust had settled, after the tears had dried, and after the global headlines had already been written. William and Camilla sat down together. No staff, no legal advisors, no note-takers, and no witnesses. Just the two of them, sitting across from each other, weighed down by 30 years of complex history, family trauma, and institutional pressure. What was actually said in that room will likely never be leaked, and perhaps it shouldn't be. Some conversations are too heavy for public consumption. But we know how it ended by the way they walked out. Camilla came out first. She was composed, but not with the polished, artificial perfection of a royal public engagement. She looked like someone who had just set down an impossibly heavy burden. A woman who had finally accepted a reality she spent decades trying to rewrite. William emerged a few minutes later. Observers noted that he didn't look triumphant, nor did he look relieved. He looked resolved. There's a profound difference between being happy and being resolved. Resolve means you have done what you knew in your soul you had to do, and you are fully prepared to live with every single consequence, no matter how painful or disruptive those consequences might be. That is where the future king stands today, and the consequences are already rippling through the corridors of power. The palace machine, predictable as ever, is trying to recalibrate. There have been quiet discussions, procedural memos, and tactical assessments about what this means for the line of succession and the relationship between the monarch and the heir. But you cannot simply put this genie back into the bottle. Some words, once spoken into the world with absolute intention, can never be made quiet again. Camilla has lost something intangible. Not her crown, not her title, but an inner certainty. She has been forcefully reminded that no matter how many years she serves, no matter how many duties she fulfills, she will forever exist in the shadow of a woman who never had the chance to grow old. And the most painful part of all is that now she knows it too. King Charles, meanwhile, continues to navigate this labyrinth the only way he knows how. He loves his wife, he loves his son, and he carries a heavy, often agonizing duty as sovereign trying to hold a crumbling world together. He is a man caught between two worlds, trying to balance two loves that fundamentally reject each other. It is an imperfect, deeply human struggle, one that makes him both relatable and heartbreakingly vulnerable. He cannot choose one side without devastating the other. So he stands in the middle, absorbing the shock waves, hoping that time and duty will eventually smooth over cracks. Yet, this moment is much larger than family politics. It touches on the core identity of the British monarchy itself. For generations, the institution has tried to treat grief as a logistical problem. They believe that if they use enough bureaucratic language, phrases like legacy communications management or historical friction, they could sanitize history and manage away the memory of a woman who captured the world's soul. But they fail to realize something fundamental. Human memory does not follow royal protocol. It does not respect institutional boundaries. Princess Diana once famously said in an interview that she wanted to be the queen of people's hearts. She never lived to see how far those words would travel, but her son did. William sees it every single day. He sees it in the strangers who still leave flowers at the gates decades after her passing. He sees it in the global digital footprint of a woman who lived in an era before social media, yet dominates it today. And somewhere along the road to his own kingship, William made a definitive choice. He decided that protecting his mother's memory was infinitely more important than maintaining a fragile, artificial peace. He decided that the crown cannot demand the erasure of a son's love. That is not just a family squabble. That is a defining historical turning point. When the history of this era is written, this will be the moment defined not by the palace intrigue, not by the tears, and not by the frantic briefings of PR teams. It will be remembered as a moment a future king drew a line in the sand and declared that some things are simply non-negotiable. No committee, no legal review, and no amount of institutional spin can change what happened. Diana's legacy belongs to her children, to history, and to the people who refuse to forget her. And as William stands firmly on the side of that line, looking toward the future of the crown, one thing is abundantly clear. The shadow of the people's princess isn't fading away. If anything, it just got a whole lot brighter.